Thank you so much to the presenters. It became ever more painfully aware as the panel wore on that we are doing this on a Saturday at 7 p.m. Yeah. So maybe going forward we can start putting the money where our mouth is and think about maybe at least enabling a 5-day week with this conference. But that is for the committee, of course, to decide. Nonetheless, we now have 40 minutes time. Thank you very much for the excellent timekeeping as well to all the presenters for questions and discussions. So please raise your hands if you have questions to comment us. So we'll start at the back with Kim, please.
Yes, so I have a question to the first speaker, Robert Frank. So I think, you mentioned that the context matters. I think the conspicuous consumption over such a behavior was there before in different contexts as well. You saw that in the different quotes in the 1920s, 1930s. There was a different movement against such behaviors as well. So I'm trying to understand that why the context now is more important than previous times. And if it's not simply the context, but if there is a deeper reason for such behaviors, then what would be the deeper reason for why we have that, right? And if there is such a reasons, then maybe simply having the consumption tax may not be enough, because there may be something else come up to nullify that effect of the consumption tax, progressive consumption tax. Then if there is a more fundamental kind of the things that you can address, what would be the potential, such things that we can think of? Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question here at the front. Katja Ritzler.
Yes, I have a lot of questions, but I will stick with two to Robert Frank. The first is, I think it's a very intriguing idea to think about consumption tax, but there's more to rich people's behavior than just consumption. Won't the rising savings increase their economic and political power? And isn't that even the more important problem? And secondly, wouldn't people just invest their savings in companies and then drive the expensive company car, and you wouldn't really reduce effective status consumption? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move right on to Maurits at the front.
Thanks. Let me be advocatus diaboli and question for Till. If we see how much more vacation time people have, longer education periods, many more years in retirement. If we would normalize that with the time when Keynes made his forecast, we probably aren't anymore that far away, no?
Okay, thank you. I would take one more question. Yeah, so please, here.
So first of all, thank you for all your presentations. I have two quick remarks. One to the second presentation. In the survey where they were asked if leisure or income was basically then preferred in a way when someone has more than others or less. I kind of would have liked the one number to be percentage-wise similar to the other, because the hourly work times were not so different than the incomes ones. The difference in incomes was a bit more. I thought that the percentage changes very much if you would do it like that, but yeah, just a suggestion on that part. And the second one is to Mr. Frank. I agreed with nearly everything you said, but on one point I kind of have to disagree, and this is with the point of when people don't put their money into, let's say, a forced pension fund that the state kind of says you must do that, that they will put it into the arms race. I kind of don't see that, because if you would argue like that, you could basically argue forcing people to put money into everything else, because if not, then they would race against each other to buy bigger houses and to send their children to the best home. I think a certain amount of, yeah.
Thank you. In the interest of equal representation or equalizing representation, I want to draw your attention to the fact that one woman has spoken so far and no question has been raised to Orla. So if there's one, please.
Yes, thank you. I did have a question for you. I really appreciated what you were sharing. And in your work, I was wondering if you looked, I mean, part of the problem, it seems to me, is about the norms in the countries where you're working. A norm that I was introduced to when I lived and worked in Thailand is the cultural norm of what they called sanuk, which means fun, which means that children, it's normal for children to be at work, to be present in the workplace. And it changed the dynamics. And I just wondered, what would you think of aiming to change norms to make that the workplace better?
Thank you. So I'll keep this round for now. I see you. You'll be first in the next round, and I'll give it back to the panel to, and maybe Robert, if you want to start.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. Context would be important, whether there was high inequality, low inequality, or even no inequality. There's always a frame of reference when you ask, how am I doing, or is this a good thing, or a thing I'd really like. You have to compare it to some frame of reference. So it's not unique that we're seeing positional effects play out in the current environment, but the point is that in times of high inequality, you get a much more powerful cascade. The movement from the people at the top, since they have so much more, causes this ripple that goes all the way down the income ladder. There was also a question about why would a consumption tax be enough. I have absolutely no idea whether it would be enough. If people didn't respond to it enough, I would say jack it up a little higher and see how they do. But of course, there could be many other instruments. There was a question about the effect of the consumption tax on wealth accumulation here. I'm very glad you asked that question. I didn't have time to address that issue. The people at the top of the income ladder would be most affected by the incentives under this tax, and their response, if the tax worked, would be to redirect money they would have spent on building wings on their mansions instead into investment accounts. And that would mean almost certainly that people at the top of the income ladder would die with much bigger estates than before. And that would be a bad thing for exactly the reasons you mentioned. So I think that an essential companion policy to the adoption of a progressive consumption tax would be a much more aggressive estate tax. And I think people complain about the estate tax in the US, they call it the death tax. It's actually the very best tax we have. You pay it after you're dead. It's painless in that sense. It's in a way like a lawyer's contingency contract. If you have those in Europe, I don't know. If you're poor and you can't afford a lawyer, but a company has injured you, you can present the facts of your case to a lawyer. If the lawyer thinks you have a good case, she will accept your case and argue it in court, and if you win, she claims 30% of the judgment, you get 70%. It's the same with the estate tax. You're starting out, you have no idea whether you'll be successful, highly successful. Almost certainly you won't be. Most people aren't. Only the people who are really successful end up paying any estate tax. So it's the kind of thing that you would hope to be vulnerable to pay someday. And in the meantime, because of the extra revenue, you get better roads, better schools, better public services of all kinds. What a great deal. Why wouldn't anybody voluntarily sign up for that if presented in the right way early in the career? The last query was why would people take their money out of a private savings account if we abandoned Social Security and had voluntary retirement accounts? Why would they? For the same reason workers accept risky jobs that they're unhappy about when everybody else does it. You have an opportunity to move ahead in relative terms if you take money out of your account. You have no control over what others do. Some others are going to do it, and that means you move behind in the queue, in the educational queue, unless you do it. So that would be one of the predictions I'd feel most confident about, but maybe I'm missing the concern that prompted the question.
Thank you. Shall we just move across the podium? Orla, do you want?
Yeah, sure. On the norms question, I guess it depends what kind of norm you're talking about. But certainly there is going to be a norm change necessary if working time reduction is going to be, universally accepted or adopted, because it's going to have to be demanded by the electorate and so on. It probably isn't going to happen too easily. So even in the interviews, something that came up a lot was particularly people who had worked for a long time, felt really guilty on Friday when they weren't in work. They had just this, I've worked for 20 years, 5 days a week, and I'm not lazy, and this very kind of internalized belief of intrinsic worth being linked to productivity, which I guess is a problem in our society overall, I would say. So yeah, that's the kind of norm change I'd like to see. I don't know if I'd want my kids in the office, to be honest. I have a hard enough time with my students without adding them in it as well. But I guess maybe to your point is, if it was normalized that everybody, like parents, say in the Nordic countries where we have the highest rates of female workforce participation and low rates of burnout and so on, you do see equal rates of parents' leave. But that's been okay, I see you're nodding, that's what you meant. That's been statutory mandated. We can't leave it up to people. The norm changes. You can't rely, I guess, it's better to drive it by policy. And I guess this is why feminist scholars for decades have been talking about the need for universal reduced work time, so that it's not on the individual. You're not relying on somebody to have the strength and position or whatever to say, actually, I'm going to change this norm. But instead, it's kind of coming from the employer or the government or whatever else it is.
Yeah, Mario played the devil's advocate and said that maybe if you factor in paid vacation and retirement age, then maybe we are not so far away from Keynes's optimism. I mean, Keynes wrote this essay in a very informal way. It was not he didn't do any empirical work there really, and he even quotes, I think, from poems and from ancient Greek literature. So I wouldn't. I mean, is it really important if there would also be multiple ways of factoring in vacation time, retirement age, and so on, and then try and compare this with Keynes's prediction, because we don't know if he, in his prediction that we would be at a 3-day work week, he kept vacation time constant, life expectancy constant, and so on. So I'm not sure that is a very relevant and important comparison. I think the deep important question is, going forward, from the point of view of society, would we be better off if we used future increases in productivity to increase everyone's average real incomes, or reduced working time, increased leisure time? I think that's the real question, and I'm not sure is really all that important if that then is consistent with Keynes's prediction in that beautiful little essay. On the methodological question, the survey, yeah, I mean, there's a large literature out there that has asked questions like this, and then authors have experimented with different numbers and different percentage changes, and it gets complicated. And also, I don't think one should take these surveys at face value, because, I mean, obviously, how long do people really think about these questions? It's about hypothetical stages of the world. So it's very hard for people to imagine a world that would be very different from the one that we observe right now. And so I think all that one can really get from those questions is a sense of the direction. And it has been like shown multiple times that consumption or income are seen as more positional than leisure. And I think that's the qualitative result that I think is robust. But one can talk endlessly about the methodology.
Thanks a lot. So we certainly have time for a second round. So we're starting at the back, please.
I don't have a question. I just want to give a shout out to my friend Noor, who lives in Beirut and is studying economics. Also, he would love to be here. He would have as good a time here as I have been having. It's been super inspiring. And I just want to thank everyone for organizing this, for being here, for being amazing and inspiring, and that's it. This one's for you, Noor.
Thank you. All right, so I have a number of questions over here. Let's start at the front, please. Yes.
Yeah, I got a question for Dr. Kelly. So first of all, really thank you very much for your presentation, and it's really awesome that we finally have so many results on working time reduction. And I was wondering what your stance is on highlighting productivity gains from reducing working hours, because very often I see like entrepreneurs saying, "Oh yeah, working hour reductions pay off." But also on the other hand, like trade unionists saying, "Oh yeah, it pays for itself." But I would argue that we've already paid for it in the past 50 years, and we should finally be able to reap our benefits from it, right? So I was wondering what your stance on this is.
Thank you. I have the woman at the back, please.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation. Also, my question is also to Dr. Kelly, because I 100% agree with you that we need this reduction of working time to actually have a more equal distribution of care work. But at the same time, I'm sometimes a bit pessimistic when it comes to picking up this norms argument of even if we have this working time reduction, if it actually will lead to a more equal distribution of care work. So I was wondering what your opinion on that is, if we just have to hope for other norms, or if you have anything that's maybe, or opinion or an idea that's maybe a bit more graspable, what could be done. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question at the back, please.
Hi, thanks. My question is also for Dr. Kelly.
We have an overcorrection issue now.
Thank you.
In the interest of looking to get the work time reduction implemented, I was wondering, the role of trade unions probably can't be ignored, and so I was wondering if there's been any investigations into trade unions' perspectives on the 4-day working week.
Thanks. At the front, the gentleman. Any women? I would still be happy to take.
I have two questions here. The first, it's related to how we change the mentality of people and businesses looking at leisure life, work in terms of laziness. So it's like if you have leisure, then you are lazy, you are not working. And the second, it's related to Global South, Global North. Would we apply this reduction in working time to also Global South, where also they have technological gap and productivity gap, and that.
Thank you. So I have, I think, one last question then here, and I'm closing the round.
First, a general remark on your remark from Saturday, 7 p.m. It feels like leisure for being here.
I'm glad to hear.
And then a question on the labor market. In the Netherlands, I think we have the opposite at the moment in a discussion. The Netherlands is a champion in part-time work, and we have a shortage of labor at the moment. We have more vacancies than we have unemployed. And there's a discussion on increasing or decreasing the number of part-time workers, so increasing the hours worked. So how would you see this, and how would you see this in the current discussion?
All right. Till, can you speak to some of, and not all of them were namely addressed by name, but I think some, maybe Till and Robert, you can speak to? Yeah, so maybe we'll come back across the podium.
Oops. I think I can just only maybe respond to the last question, which I think is key. I think there is an important political economy dimension here, because I hear this argument a lot, like how can you advocate for shorter work hours in a situation where we have demographic aging and we have full employment and we have a shortage of labor. But I think from a political economy perspective, the causality runs just the other way around. It's because we have full employment, at least in some countries, and that's the case in Germany. We have a current account surplus. We have demographic aging, so that there may be some shortage of labor that workers can realistically push for shorter work hours, because the balance of power is to the favor of workers at the moment for the first time in a long time. Because I heard very few people argue in favor of working time reduction at a time when the unemployment rate was high and when the demographic situation was much more favorable. So that's the political economy perspective, I think. And then obviously the question is, if we have a shortage of labor, that means given the demand, public and private, for goods and services, the structure of demand for goods and services that we have currently, there may be a shortage of labor, but then maybe it will be a good idea to reorganize the supply side and go more, for example, for collective goods and for example, public transportation. We need much less labor to provide a very good public transportation network, and then free. Of course, it can't be done overnight, but then in a dynamic fashion, free the work hours that are currently absorbed by the way too big, I think, automotive industry, for example, in Germany. So I guess that would be my elements of response to that.
Orla, do you want to go next?
Okay. So thank you all for those questions. First, I'll go in chronological order. The productivity gains, yes. It's not only, I guess, to understand why that's happening, often you do research and it's, you're using existing macro level data and everything's great and, you can just clean it. But in addition to the challenge of doing your own data collection and doing field research in terms of logistics and other things, there's also the different actors that you're working with. And in a way, this is a political movement too, right? Like it's certainly part of certain political movements and the labor union movement and so on. And this particular forum, the 4-day-week global trials, came from a businessman who really pushed it in terms of productivity. So I guess it's, does the movement want to reach a critical mass where a lot of private sector firms are kind of signing on to it in order to kind of push a bigger agenda, so that we reach a point where at a government level there's an intervention and we get this statutory reduction in working time regardless of your sector, regardless of. So I guess that would kind of be the argument there, that you I guess you highlight its marketing almost, the parts that people want to hear. But actually, again, it gets back to our cultural norms too. I've done a lot of, there's been tons of media interest in this. And invariably, I always try to talk about climate change and the environment because I think it's something we should try and bring into nearly every conversation if we can. Much to my poor family's disappointment, but in general in these kinds of sessions because it's so important, and invariably it gets pushed back to productivity gains because that's really how it's understood. So definitely that's a challenge. Will it lead to the more equal distribution of care work? We actually gathered data on this. I didn't have time to present it, but so interestingly, so there's some of the risk is. So there was a smaller scale study done in Belgium. One just came out, and it's that women and men were using the time differently. And actually, we still see this. Not only does it not address the imbalance, that it might actually kind of make it worse. But we didn't find that. What we found is on the day off, people are doing. So we did baseline. We looked at how people spend their time, how many hours per week they spend on these different activities, and across the board, we see these inequities. Everybody is spending their time, the majority of their time, they're doing a little bit of work, but they're doing a lot of it on hobbies or self-development, care, sleep. That's what people are burnt out. That's what they're using the time for. So while it's not addressing it's not addressing the inequality, this alone. It's like it has to be part of a broader kind of cultural shift in lots of ways. It's also not making it worse. Men and women aren't actually using their time differently, depending on kids and caring responsibilities a little bit, but we don't really see like significant difference in patterns. Trade unions, absolutely, they're part of this. ETUI is part of our work time reduction research network. And actually the Irish round of data collection was sponsored by our largest trade union. So they gave us a grant. So they are part of the story for sure. And working time productivity gap in the global south. Yes, this is another one of these macro inequality questions that we're going to have to talk to because the issue is, okay, so high income nations benefit and then it's a race to the bottom, right? These jobs are going to go somewhere else, which is going to cause problems in lots of different ways. So for sure, that's something that we're going to have to kind of figure out. And again, part of this broader shift, technology transfer, and more equity. I suppose one answer to this is within like the degrowth and ecological economics arguments who talk about work time reduction in that context, that it's high income nations that need to scale back our growth, and therefore working time reduction should be looked at in this context first. And kind of the argument is, okay, jobs aren't going to go away because of like the sunk costs of working in it. We know firms don't move for these high-tech sectors that easily. And then there's also one big thing that I just want to bring in, which is going to kind of, I think, change all of this, is AI. That's the reason why, like the jobs as we know them, work time reduction as a scholarship was extremely, it had this moment in the 70s when everybody was worried about automation and the displacement of workers in blue-collar jobs. Now it's radiologists and accountants and software engineers that are going to be affected by this, academics, everybody. So the world of work as we know it won't continue as it was. There is no business as usual in any of this, with climate change, with everything. So I guess there's too many factors, but certainly it's something that we need to think about in kind of a broader suite of policies. I think that was it for me.
Thank you. Robert, do you?
I realized I didn't get to the second part of your question, which was about if we had a progressive consumption tax, what would keep people from investing in a business and then consuming through their business, company cars and the like. And that's of course a problem, but it's also a problem under the current income tax system. And the response is you just have to police against that. You penalize people for doing it, and if you need to hire more agents, we'll have some revenue to do that.
Thank you. We do have time for a brief third round, if there are still questions open. Please, Marc Lavoie.
Well, it's a question for Till. In your first table of regressions, It turned out that the tax, the income tax on labor income, if it was higher, then it meant people would work less. Does your result support supply-side economics?
Thank you. I have a question at the front, please.
Okay, this is also a question for Dr. Frank. Don't you think that we have too many taxes already? Like another spending or consumption tax would be already like way too many. Like, as you said, when does it stop? Where do we draw the line and we say, okay, enough taxes for now or for this year?
All right, thank you. And then one at the back, yes, and I'm afraid I'm closing the list.
Hello. Okay. So Orla. So yeah, in France we had the 35 heures, so the 35 hours. I mean, you're probably aware, but I mean, basically Nicolas Sarkozy in 2007 was like one of his main program arguments was, I'm going to take France out of the 35-hour hell. And ever since, like the conservative branch of the political exchequer in France has been hell-bent against further time reduction. I mean, in the face of all evidence and logic. Apart from, apparently, it made things harder for a little while in hospitals because not enough people were trained, and when you have like excess mortality, and you can blame it on this, leftist law. Obviously, it makes. So I mean, I'm sure you're aware of that, but it's the Till. You're going to get one question that I want to ask all degrowth people, and I'm very sympathizing with the idea, but how do you deal with the public debt to GDP ratio? Like when everybody becomes lazy, you halve GDP and you end up with crazy ratios in debt to GDP. How do you deal with that? I mean, will Germany survive? Will Irish people survive? I worked with Irish people. I've never met anybody like on the whole as conservative in terms of like fiscal policy. How would they deal with like 800% public debt to GDP ratio? And Robert, okay, so apart from like the dodging the consumption tax, the other issue to me is there are many people who don't really react to price signals. Okay, I'm here. And typically people who use credit cards and they end up spending too much would then be penalized by your system. So not only in the first place they spend too much, then they have to pay an enormous tax and they basically end up bankrupt. So how do you deal with that?
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid I'm closing the list. I hope the open question will be the last open question will be cleared after presentations. So shall we move one last time and include your closing statements so that we will be in time?
One question was, don't we already have too many taxes? What I proposed was to replace the current progressive income tax with a more steeply progressive tax on consumption spending. So that leaves us with the same number of taxes. Actually, I think we probably need more taxes, not fewer. An issue that's come up has been the degrowth movement. I think it's sincerely motivated by climate concerns, but the fact is only growth in a small proportion of things that make up GDP cause injury to the climate. Most things we buy are totally neutral with respect to their effect on the climate. And we do have good policies for discouraging the kinds of consumption that cause climate injury. And as an economist, you won't be surprised that I favor taxes rather than prohibitions, just because they grant individuals more freedom to decide how important an activity is and how much they're willing to curtail it. Those who don't want to curtail the activity that causes harm pay a penalty in the form of a higher tax that enables others to pay lower taxes. They compensate them for so we're concerned about the total reduction in emissions, and really we ought to be raising all the revenue we need to do even the most generous public agenda by taxing only activities that cause harm to other people. Another question was that, aren't there people who don't react intelligently to taxes, and might they get into trouble for that reason? I guess the answer is yes. What would you have us do about such people? I mean, if you get into trouble, that's how you learn.
Thank you. Yes, we'll move.
Just on the conservative policy, Sarkozy, that example of the conservative policy and politicians kind of weighing in, absolutely, that it's also kind of happened in the UK. So, for example, colleagues of mine in Cambridge did the evaluation of the South Cambridgeshire County Council reduced work time trial, and it was the release of the results became highly politicised in the run-up to the election, and the Conservatives representatives started really like trying to pick holes with it and with the methodology and so on. And it turned out everything was rigorous, so it was fine. But it sure it is a political issue. I guess it kind of gets back to the previous point of when you're doing research on something that's topical, it becomes a political issue. But I mean, I guess now with Keir Starmer in power, that's not an issue anymore, but I'm sure it will continue to be. You know, we aren't rational actors in terms of the policies get put in place. You know, it's down to the political winds of the day as well. Yeah.
Thanks, and Till for the final statement.
To be honest, I didn't really get the question on the debt to GDP ratio. Maybe we can talk about it at over dinner. I don't see why shorter work hours should in any way be related to the GDP ratio, but maybe we can talk about that later. On Mark's questions, yeah, I'm not prepared to answer that question in a very technical way, but I mean, yeah, we kind of engage with the literature that says, all the differences in working hours between the US and Europe are actually related to taxation. Prescott made this claim a while back, and when you run those regressions, one important question is: do you look at marginal tax rates? That's very difficult because you just have one variable, and or you can use several variables. But tax systems are very different across countries. So which is the right tax variable that you use? Because from a neoclassical perspective, you want to look at marginal tax rates, obviously, but that's hard to get over a longer time series for many different countries. So oftentimes people put in the average tax rate, and then you do get a negative correlation with work hours. But then the question is that due to an incentive supply side effect, or is it due to the fact that countries with higher taxes also have a larger welfare state? And is that what reduces work hours? Because the welfare state works as a functional equivalence or substitute for private income. And my preferred interpretation would also be that the provision of universal basic services from the government in education, healthcare, housing, and all that alleviates any possible positional arms races. And so it could be due to many factors. And so what we did is what was estimate a standard model where we have the tax rate as a control variable, and show that the variables that we were really interested in, inequality, collective bargaining, coverage, and also transfers in kind, had an additional explanatory power for accounting for cross-sectional and also time series differences in work hours. So that was the strategy.
And with that, I would like to thank the presenters and all of you for being part. And as is customary, I would like to thank the organizing team. And for today, I would ask Sabine Nimitz to come up, because it is her 10-year anniversary in organizing this conference, and we are greatly appreciative. Of course, in view of the entire organizing team, we greatly appreciate the efforts that you go to and the lengths that you go to every year in making this conference as hospitable and as well organized as it is, as well as, of course, the entire organizing team of the conference, along with Tom Bauerman and many others. I have two brief announcements to make. I will not keep you more than 1 minute each. Just a reminder, there's a time change tomorrow, so recall the mnemonic. We fall back. We have an extra hour of sleep ahead of you. Less stress in the morning for your travels. And food today will only be served at the restaurant. And with that, after 11 hours of leisure days, I now release you into even more leisure and enjoy your time.